Hey guys, what is up? My name is Scott, and this is the Embrace Nerd channel. And if you've clicked this video, you may have clicked it for two different reasons. You've either come from YouTube itself, or you've come from Twitter. And either way, I welcome you. And this is about something that I think is extremely important, which is when it deals with conservative art and promoting the idea of promoting conservative art, because I do think it's needed in our culture. I think we really do need it. And not necessarily even conservative art, but just traditional liberalism, the old school way. When conservatives and liberals used to have more in common than they do now. I think more content like that is needed more than ever. And I just want to just kind of break down my thoughts on what conservative art is anyway, and get into, what I think we could do to help promote art on the conservative side more than we traditionally see. And so, anyway, if you do, let's go ahead and get started with this, shall we? So the first thing is, what is conservative art? And I would say it's complicated. And because the reason it's complicated, because I think it changes a little bit over time. And the reason it changes over time is because of the idea of conservatism versus progressivism. Progressivism is this idea that this wheel just keeps moving forward. And conservatism is the idea of holding back on certain things. So sometimes it is good to have progressive ideas on certain topics. And other times, the conservatism is really needed to pull back on those things so they don't go too far, right? And the reality is that our left and right dichotomy is a little silly now, because really the things that we argue about, if you ever look at a political compass, and it's like a political compass test you could take that kind of shows you politically where you stand. And on the political compass test, when you take that test, it is, you got your left, you got your right, and you got your authoritarian, and then you got your libertarian, right? And wherever you fall on that, it kind of shows you where you are. But the thing is that a lot of the culture war issues that really divide us today really almost really don't have to do with left versus right. It really has to do with what we think authority should be over on certain topics, and what topics we feel that liberty should reign. And we have disagreements on those things. And so literally they're authoritarian versus libertarian ideas that we argue about, and both sides lean on either one depending on the situation, right? And so it almost makes us have to rethink things, because the reality is the things that we used to have our differences about, the things that used to make us truly left and right, don't really exist as much anymore, because we used to have a more traditional conservative versus an old school liberal, and that has kind of become one. As time is moved forward, we've seen a lot of people join the conservative movement, join the MAGA movement, the Republican Party, who maybe were lifelong Democrats once upon a time. You can think of someone like Donald Trump, for example. Donald Trump was a Democrat. Tulsi Gabbard was a Democrat. And RFK was a Democrat, and now they're on our side. And so you can tell how maybe morally, certain people's values have changed while others have stayed the same. There's a good meme about this, and I'll post it in this video right now, about how the right has always been kind of stayed in one place, and then the left keeps moving to the left, while the center is also kind of staying in the same place. Well, eventually, the person that might have been on the center left has now become a part of the right. It's just something that continues to happen. And so as the Overton window is growing more separated, there comes a question of, well, what does that mean for art, right? If in real life there's these political values that are continuing moving a certain direction, and they're leaving old values they once had behind, what does that mean for those people that still hold on to those values? What happens to those stories that still represent those values? Well, there's a good argument to be made that they now represent conservative art, ironically enough, even if maybe once upon a time they were more of a classical liberal idea. Because, I mean, at the end of the day, conservative and a classical liberal still represent liberalism. That's still something that an old school version of it, but still represent that idea. And so really those things just kind of come together and eventually, ironically enough, will maybe become conservative art. And then there's this other idea that, you have things like superheroes and Batman, and, at one point they will call Batman a fascist. And then at another point, they'll be like, well, he's a vigilante, right? So isn't that inherently left wing? Even though maybe they would say the opposite, a couple years before, to really fit whatever ideas they have about it. But if you read old school comic books, if you read even some current comic books, you still get that idea that they can't even keep away from it. There was an article that came out with Eric Kripke, the creator of The Boys, who basically called Marvel supporters of, what was it? He said something about it was right wing. He was basically calling Marvel right wing, but basically was saying that it was supporting white nationalism, right? And so there are some truth that, not what he was saying, but there's some truth that, that there's some stories like Captain America, for example. It's hard to look at Captain America, and it may drive Chris Evans crazy to say this, but it's hard to watch Captain America and watch Winter Soldier and even watch Civil War and come out thinking that it's totally this left-wing film. I mean, even if it's made by people who would probably be left-wing, there's just certain things that might be inherently right wing nowadays that people just don't even realize or think about. And getting into things about politics and art and right wing art, is it always blatant politics? And I would say no, but there is a truth that right wing art tends to be extremely on the nose, and very preachy, which has always been kind of an issue that we've had, that Christian film has had, being overly preachy to their specific in group. And I will say though, and I don't know if we want to call debate art, but you have to have a certain skill, and it's entertaining to watch. So in some weird way, doesn't it kind of become art? I don't know. But I do think the right does win at memes. I think we do win at debate. I think there's a reason that podcasts have the really good ones not only start to become a little right wing, start to lean a little right wing. There's a reason why Nerdrotic has 1 million something subscribers, and some of the other YouTubers that in the YouTube space that talk about movies that have been around much longer are a little lower than that. I think there's a little bit of more authenticity, probably. And merch, people may hate the MAGA hat, but the reality is that, the artistic thought that went behind the MAGA hat has produced something so unique that I don't think the left can even replicate. And so those are clear political, things, but I do think in some ways that does represent a little bit of what right-wing art is, which is really the promotion of something. Even the promotion of logic, I think, critique, for example. And, those tend to be, a little bit more political in nature. But like I said, though, many conservatives are private. And they're not going to be coming out and expressing every thought they have. And so there's people probably working in Hollywood right now that are very secretly conservative, and they're not going to tell nobody, and they're going to make their art. They're going to tell their stories. and people won't ask too many questions. And so there's things that probably get considered left-wing art, and it's actually made by a right-wing person, funny enough, right? Because not everybody just, you know, conservatives, something that the left probably needs to learn is the conservatives, though they may be very politically aware, they don't live their lives surrounded by politics 24/7. Not all of them. We have a unique group of people that do, but most of them are just trying to live their lives, right? And like, which basically is like everybody else. But they are politically minded though. And they don't just come out and say things all the time. They're a little bit more quiet about it. So there's things, like I said, there's probably things that people call left-wing art that probably is not. So just something to think about. And, you know, when you get into how the left describes it, and what was funny is when I looked up this topic, everyone, and I mean almost every video I saw, if it was a left-leaning person talking about conservative art, it was highly insulting. Now, I'm not saying that some of the things they said was not correct. There was a lot they said that was hard to hear at some points, but was true when it comes to the issues with conservative art. But like I said, highly insulting because they set a narrative of separating what is conservative and what is liberal. What is liberal now? What is left wing art now? And the more you dig into it, it's like I said, they set you up to be the worst enemy because they basically set it up like this, where it's like left, they use words and things that sound really good. And then on the right, they use words that make it sound really bad. Like instead of using the right believes in limited government, they're going to say that the right believes in hierarchy. So they believe in a class system, and they word things to make it seem like it attaches to all these things that people would resume as evil, whereas they would say that they believe in liberalism, they believe in this and this and this, and they don't do the same thing, which sets up a pretty nasty kind of situation. But the one compliment I did hear that the left gave was this was, and I quote, "They did great art in spite of what they believe." Which is just a crazy thing to say, especially when you watch something like, Clint Eastwood in his films, that the essence of what he's making does lean into what he believes. And maybe belief can be a little complicated and it can be weighed a little bit differently, which we may get into in a little bit. But, another issue when it comes to, the right getting into different things is like, I've mentioned that in Hollywood, there probably are people that are secretly conservative, but there's also a reality that the people that are known are definitely getting less roles than your average left-leaning person is. Now, there's some people that have been grandfathered in, right? Like, I think people love working with Clint Eastwood. So he's an older man, they'll work with him and they're excited to work with him. But it doesn't mean that a new person with a unique vision is going to get the same attention and the same amount of work or opportunity. And it must be a lot difficult. It must be really difficult to try to do that because when you're in something that kind of becomes an orthodoxy, it happened, it probably causes you to probably get less work and to not even feel like you're included within the group of people when it comes to producing stories and imagination, because you walk in and everyone else is so not just opposite from you, but so die hard opposite of you that I'm sure that it can produce a lot of friction within that career path. And so why does this matter? What matters is because we do need to make a change. Conservatives do need to make a change when it comes to art, because we need to start winning victories back on the things that we have let go. And one of those things is the arts. We have let that go to people who, honestly, a lot of them, after the death of Charlie Kirk, it was even more loud and clear that some of these people really do hate our guts. And they really do want the worst for us. And so Not all of them, of course, but there's a lot of them that were very loud, that got no punishment. Um, so for the things they said, and were maybe even backed and supported. So there's things that do need to be changed, and that's one of them. Conservatives need to try to start taking back certain things and start really pursuing something like art in a bigger way. And so one of the biggest things is that, Ben Shapiro always says that, facts don't care about your feelings, but the opposite is also true. And we've learned this, that feelings don't care about your facts. And so you can do a movie, you know, and someone on the left can do a movie that has so many falsehoods in it, right? But if they can make you feel something, then you're going to take that experience as what's truth in the world. And that's a pretty scary reality when the right has no alternative to say the things that they need to say within society. There's so many people that will vote not based off what they actually know, not based off of what they've sought out in real life, just based off how they feel. But how they feel, a lot of that has been orchestrated by the things that they enjoy, the things they watch, right? And then they get misguided by all this other stuff, which leads into the way they may vote. And so, one of the biggest things is that, it's not like we're the only ones that have weakness. The left has weakness as well when it comes to art. And, one of those things is, casting a wide net of art that the left, wants to move on from is what we're seeing is becoming their biggest weakness, as they have become increasingly more postmodernistic about certain values and ideas. Like, for example, what is a true villain? Can a villain just be a evil villain, or does he have to have some gray area? At first, those things can be very compelling, but then eventually you start to muddy the water of what's good and what's evil to such a degree constantly that, there is, for certain people, there is truth. There is an objective truth on who's evil and who's good, especially in certain situations. Like human beings within our sin, we see gray. But the reality is there is a deeper truth that certain things, the more you seek darkness, you become dark. The more you seek light, you become light. And so what's funny about all this, and the thing they've kind of messed up from, is not only have they delved into the preachy aspect that the right has trouble with as well, it's the biggest issue between when it comes to right art is the preachiness that comes from it. The left has delved right into that, which has come into our issues with, wokeism, I guess you would say, but really just pushing things onto kids and children that we think shouldn't be a part of it, and honestly forcing us, people who are just trying to check out from society, to be constantly reminded of current deisms. Those things get increasingly annoying, and that's a huge weakness. But by leaving behind some of those old school stories, leaving behind some of those old school ideas about what's right and what's wrong, they start to accidentally leave behind the audience. And that is something they have unknowingly been doing for really the least, especially the last 6 years. Really since COVID had started, maybe right, Rise of Skywalker down. I mean, they have been leaving a lot of people behind, and it's produced really bad work. And people have noticed, and to such a degree that people aren't going to the movies as much as they used to. And, we have a divide between left and right sometimes when it comes to free speech. And it really comes down to what I believe is what we focus on, which is the right focuses more on logic and debate to be able to express ideas with words and thoughts, whereas self-expression is more of a left-wing thing where they really want to express themselves and how they feel and think, but they don't really want to debate it out. You can take someone like Bill Maher, who has talked about this a lot and has shared how it's been such a hard time getting, a left-leaning person willing to come and, debate ideas, for example. So, we understand though that the right does need to express a little bit more. And that kind of gets into what is fair criticisms with art when it comes to on the right. And I think self-expression is kind of one of those issues. We can use our logic brain a little way too much. And all of a sudden things do become preachy. Oh crap. As I was saying, okay, as I was saying. So like I was saying that, our right wing criticisms is that for us, we focus too much on logic a lot of times and not enough on self-expression. But the problem is that we're not using our logic enough. Sometimes we don't work hard enough because a lot of right wing art does tend to lean into and go towards in-group signaling. So basically, what I call, there is propaganda or whatever, but what I like to call hoorah films, right? And so, the left has done this, not me, but, they equate Christian films as right wing art. And I think it's a good example. So I'm going to use it, with right wing art, you know, for example, God's Not Dead, right? God's Not Dead 2 specifically, okay? There was a scene where there's lawyer sitting there and he's like, we're going to prove once for all that God is dead. And you knew that line was there. So then when it comes to the end, he's like, oh, I have to rethink everything that I believe. And they can prove him wrong, right? And that's kind of what I call like hoorah films. Is that they're made for the Christian audience. For the Christian audience to applaud and clap, and maybe some good things can come out of it, but really what it happens is it becomes message first, and then it becomes story and art second, which has really been a problem when it comes to the right. And like I said, I do think it's fair that self-expression be called out amongst the right when it comes to art, and honestly being willing to let the right have self-expression, because think of it like this, how many people do you know that were very artistic when they were young, had a lot of talent, and maybe they were pressured by their family not to pursue it, right? They didn't support, the pursuit of art, within the family. And so they were like, hey, they had to weigh it, right? Like, I know that you could become an actor one day and never make any money. I know that you could become an artist and never make any money. I know you could sing songs and never make any money. And then you're 30, you're 40, 35, and your life has kind of gone past you. You haven't got married, haven't got kids. And once you're at that point, life's life, right? And that has to be a risk. And so for a family member, they don't want their child to go through a risk like that. And, they kind of pressure their children sometimes not to pursue the arts in the way they should. And to be fair, if you are a parent that eventually does let your child go and to pursue the arts, there's a huge possibility that even when you do, they may get captured by the institutions that we left behind, for example, schools. So there are chances of, creating art that may, express or lead towards like a right wing way of living, may not necessarily be a promised thing, because they may go the other way, right? Because children don't, they may know the values of their parents, but doesn't mean they're necessarily going to carry the values of their parents. But I do think that has cut off a lot of conservative people, from pursuing art. And the funny thing is that we do support people who hate us. I mean, it's true. We support people who hate our guts. I have some books behind me, and I would say even beside me, of people who probably have never necessarily came out and said it truly, but probably really do despise us, especially after we saw what happened to Charlie and the reactions that people had. There's a lot of these people that feel validated, morally validated to wish death upon you, but yet we still support them. And what's funny is that we're actually very tolerant. Conservatives are very tolerant. And, like I mentioned before, even though conservatives are inherently very, I would say more politically aware than maybe the left is, especially on understanding what the other side believes. Um, Mainly because we get it thrusted upon us all the time, if we like it or not. Um, I will say this, that, they tend to have different tastes and interests, right? And so for us, they may view supporting Daily Wire, for example, as supporting politics. Instead of when I get on HBO Max to watch Game of Thrones, they're both sword and sorcery kind of shows. But when I turn on Game of Thrones, I'm going, okay, well, I'm escaping reality. Whereas I turn on Daily Wire Plus and I go, oh, I am getting into politics. Even though technically I'm supposed to be watching a show that's sword and sorcery and it has nothing to do with politics at all. And what's funny is that HBO Max, we may not look at it like that, but the reality is it has just as much politics, maybe even more so than what Daily Wire has on their little Plus app and what they intend to have, which is kind of, and same with Netflix and all those things. You would be surprised how much politics is inside all the things that we watch our day to day, every day, right? But we allow people to express themselves and we can watch it, and it doesn't, we still stick to what we stand for and our values, and it doesn't really bother us as much, right? Because we tend to be, like I said, a little bit more tolerant, but end up tolerant of them, not necessarily tolerant of our own side. Because that exact example leads to something that we don't do, which is not only do we not support our own, but a lot of times, the majority of the time, they will not support you either. We have our exceptions, right? We have delicious chicken sandwiches, okay? And that will eventually get captured probably by the left as well. But we have delicious chicken sandwiches at Chick-fil-A, right? Everybody still goes to Chick-fil-A. Everybody loves Chick-fil-A, right? That's not art, that's a business. But the point still stands, right? But the reality is that if they know that certain things were made by a conservative person, there's a huge possibility that they will not buy those comic books, those movies, those shows, those video games. They will not put their money there. There are exceptions to things they've been captured by, right? Like a Harry Potter video game, for example, the Hogwarts Legacy video game. When that came out, everyone was like, "We're going to cancel. We're not going to play. We're not going to play." Guess who played? All of them, right? But that's something they've already invested their heart into, and so everything that the right's going to do is going to be at least original enough to where maybe it came from a book. So maybe we could grab some people that way. But it's not like the right is going to get Batman anytime soon. Okay? It's just not going to happen. And so, it's harder to grab people in to introduce them to something new, especially as they get older. And so we won't support us. They won't support us. And as people are trying to go into the corporate side of art, if they're trying to work for these big studios, and even if it's something simple as small as like comic books, the reality is you have these cancel pigs who really do work hard and making sure that no one that's not in their in group is a part of the corporate side of art. And I mean, there's literally Facebook groups about this, about getting rid of these kind of people, you know. And so one of the other things when it comes to us not supporting our own is not only is it hard for the right to grab the right's attention when it comes to art and pursuit of art and the support of conservative art, because how we view it politically, which isn't all our fault. Some of that does deal with the business. I'll get into that in a minute. But there's also this other side within the conservative movement that we tend to police our own a lot louder than we police someone on the left, right? I think the left might think that's crazy that they can't see that. But just for an example, I was watching, and I may do a video on this, a separate video on this. I was watching a channel, and it had a conservative artist on the channel, and they were talking about the Pendragon cycle on Daily Wire. And during that conversation, he was talking about how he found certain aspects of the trailer inappropriate because it showed this girl's back. And it seemed to be like the two people that were kissing in the show, in the trailer, were naked, right? And then there was a scene where she goes into this arena and she's wearing this skimpy guard. And he complained that for him, that was basically doing the exact same thing that something like Game of Thrones would do, which, to be honest, is a very separate thing. But he was pushing his Catholicism and what he believes, which is fair. I'm a Christian. I have strong values on as with this as well. But he was really gatekeeping what art should be on the conservative side and how it should be, you know. And I do think there should be some gatekeeping on conservative art, to an extent. But especially if it's conservative and not necessarily classical liberal. But that said, it was like, not only will we police our own and heavily critique our own harder than we would do, let's say, something that's on the left, but we will go out of our way sometimes to protest art that's on the right. We will go out of our way to demonize, to go after. I remember when Ripperverse came out, and I have a bunch of Ripperverse comics. I'm behind. I have positives about Ripperverse. I have critiques about Ripperverse. But I remember when it first came out, how hard people went after it, and then eventually how the right started to go after it. People, like an example in Comicsgate, were really went after it really hard, to the point that it probably took away sales from both, right? Both sides probably lost sales from their art because of how hard conservatives, people on the right, let's say, will go after each other. And a lot of it tends to be a little legalistic, right? In our personal gatekeeping that we and we set it up to fail. So, and in fairness, okay, conservative, as a conservative libertarian-esque customer, it can be hard sometimes to support conservative art, okay? Like I said, if I want to support like an indie comic book sometimes, it can be difficult to trust, are they going to deliver the things that I pay for, right? I have my Razor Fist book right here. It's an awesome book. The one I fell just a minute ago. It's an awesome book, okay? Great story, okay? But I had to trust that they would deliver, and they did deliver, and it was great, okay? I've supported Big Man Comics, okay? And he has delivered, and I've enjoyed, not saying there's critiques I have with certain things, but, overall enjoyed, the product that I got. Ripperverse has always been really great about that stuff. But there is questions of what things, can you trust this, right? And that can make it difficult because you're supporting an individual. You're not necessarily supporting this company, and you just have to trust that you're going to get it. And that's kind of with every type of art, right? So that's not necessarily solely on conservatives, but I do think it's a reality that a lot of conservatives are going to be, that are artists, are going to be individuals selling to you as an individual that may not be outside, part of a company, and you got to trust that you're going to get that product. Speaking while we're on the topic of comic books, I kind of wish that something like a Comicsgate would have become more of like a Japanese Shonen Jump than really what they became. And I think that's kind of a bummer because, I was hoping for something that was going to be a little bit more merit-based that would grow into this thing. I think calling something Comicsgate and making it this thing where the stories have to be really great to continue to succeed would be a really cool concept that really should be considered by those in Comicsgate. But, there has been some things that have hurt them, bad business, whatever, not delivering like I mentioned earlier. But the biggest thing, I think I mentioned this too, was, that that in-group kind of collectivist type mindset, kind of like cancel pigs, where they're going after you for, because of Rippaverse or whatever, right? And it's silliness infighting that is really not helping anybody, especially when it comes to conservative art. We're not helping each other. We're really just going after each other. And the left doesn't have to do anything, right? They're just chill. So that's a problem. It definitely needs to be fixed. Daily Wire, for them, they went from, winning loudly to kind of losing loudly. And some aspects of this has nothing to do with art, but rather business and the things they chose to do in business. Some things were out of their control, but then it was after those bad things happened, how did they handle it? But like I said, conservatives were so contrarian that they could say the simplest thing, and then they attach who that person, the individual is, to the company they work for. And then they go, you know what? Well, I'm not going to support you, right? And some of it is because we have to have trust that you are carrying, forth the values that we think is important for us to carry. I know when they got into the whole Crisis King situation, some aspects of that may have been fair, some of it may not have been fair, but the way it was handled was not handled well, and it definitely hurt their business. It had to have hurt their business. And when you have pundits, you're trying to have a media company, right? You're trying to have a media company. And when you connect your media company to your story company, really, let's separate it a little bit. But when you connect that to your political side of your media company, and then you have one of your pundits come out and basically tell people, in his opinion, that he thinks it's lame, and kind of encourages people not to watch anime, it's eventually it's gonna make people untrusting, especially when anime is like one of the biggest markets out there for storytelling right now, to the point that an anime film, Demon Slayer, that came out recently, made more money than Superman, right? So, and what's funny is too, a lot of anime, okay, it's from Japan, but a lot of anime stories, especially certain ones, if you look into them, I would say, for example, Naruto, probably has a more right-wing way of viewing things, a more conservative way of viewing things, ironically enough. Which is just kind of funny, and we kind of deny it. We say that's corny or that's lame, instead of bringing it in, just something to think about. The right needs to work on things like that. So, on art though, the products that you made, right? Going back into the in-group signaling, Lady Brawlers was definitely in-group signaling. Now, was it, on the nose preachy? Yes. Messaging over probably story? Yes. Did it have some funny parts though? I would say it did. And maybe it was just for the right, but that was okay. And it did seem like it was kind of made for fun. They had everybody that was, that works for Daily Wire a part of that movie. So there is some truth that some of that was just for fun, and it shouldn't have been taken too serious. And for that was okay. But then when you have Mr. Bertram come out, and I watched clips of Mr. Bertram, and a lot of it was hard to watch. A lot of it was really, really, really hard to watch. And it did make it a concern of, will this be an every IP thing? And, looking at the clips of Mr. Bertram, honestly, what they should have done is got Seamus Coughlin from Freedom Tunes and talked to him, and, maybe we could have had something like Twisted Plots a lot sooner. I know that Seamus wants to keep that on YouTube, but, imagine having clips from Freedom Tunes that you can just pull up on Daily Wire Plus. That would have been a really good idea, and I think it would have been better than Mr. Bertram, to be honest. Sadly enough. But the issue with Mr. Bertram is not Mr. Bertram. The issue with Mr. Bertram was constant current dayisms for comedy. And, a lot of things doesn't always mean like, us winning the culture doesn't mean constantly owning the libs, right? We need to be expressing our ideas. We need to be pointing out our values, our ideas, where we see the future, right? Let's stop being so reactionary. Let's start being more revolutionary, right? So, when you bring all these issues outside of Daily Wire's art, and then you bring the art itself together, it made it a lot for some disinterested and untrusting in the future of Daily Wire and what they wanted to pursue. Um, you can see how things had changed with Daily Wire when, they had to make business decisions and business changes uh, because of how things were being affected by them. And clearly there was people that probably left Daily Wire at that time. And which is a shame because Pendragon Cycle, like I said, so far to me does look good and enjoyable. And I'm not going to put it at like a Game of Thrones level. I think that's unfair, but I do think that there's something special there. You can tell they put a lot of heart and soul into it, right? Which is really the first step when it comes to making art, is putting your heart and soul into something and really giving it your all to make it great. But it's already hard to make great shows anyway. And so, it would be nice for them to get a reward for that hard work because I know they're reaching further. They're not playing it safe. And I really do respect that greatly. And two of our biggest winners have been something like Angel Studios and Rippaverse. The biggest has definitely been Angel Studios, but I think Rippaverse, as far as business is concerned, they're doing a fantastic job. I will say, for me personally, I haven't read all their comics, but I'm behind on a lot of their comics, and maybe I'll do a video on those in the future. But to me, there is, I think they're pursuing this a little bit more. I know they have people in charge at Rippaverse that is all about the art, but it does seem like there's been a statement or an encouragement for all the art to kind of look the same. And for me, that really does need to change. Even if the art continues to get better, I don't want everything to look the same, right? I want to feel some things differently. And it has been great that they pursue some things that maybe Marvel and DC has decided to leave behind. But when you're competing with Marvel and DC, honestly, competing against Marvel is not that difficult right now. Marvel is kind of fell into that trap that we've talked about that the left is falling towards, where there's a lot of preachiness and there's a lot of subpar stories. But with DC, I may not like some of these people, but the reality is they're having great artists and they're telling great stories and they're doing some interesting things. And the bad thing is that some of those things, may be still a little preachy and going against certain values. And it's made by people who that inherently, a lot of them still don't like us, right? And so if we want to win the culture, we have to step up our game to compete with something like a DC, for example. And so that was something I would encourage Rippaverse to look into. Because, for me, I don't want to support people who hate me, but I also want to support something that I can see is ready to compete in a deeper way than just knowing that my package will arrive on time and protected, right? But they've done a lot of great stuff. And one of the greatest things they're doing, and this deals more with business outside of art, but is their Ripperson. I think they're doing great things with that. And, I think it's going to be great for, honestly, indie creators, indie conservative creators. I think it's a bright future ahead with something like a Ripperson that will be, I think we'll see pay off, eventually in the future. But it's even something I hope I partner with one day. But that's a whole other subject for another time. But Angel Studios, they're the ones I think are winning the most, right? They are the ones that are winning the most. And I'm not going to act like everything is perfect because nothing is. But they seem to be the ones that not only they still do the in-group signaling, okay? They still have that like a lot of other things do. But they do seem to be pursuing really great storytelling. And, there's always going to be this dichotomy issue with the Mormon versus Christian viewpoints on things. I know it's owned by Mormons, but I know a lot of people involved with it are Christian, like Protestant Christians. So I know that aspect gets a little complicated. But, for certain people. but they are putting out some great stuff, and and diverse stuff, right? You got the Guardians show that they're doing. They have, a lot of different shows they're doing that, people are going to be able to sit down and enjoy that may not have different tastes, have different genres, right? Which is something that, Christian films and right wing conservative esque films can sometimes have problems with, because it seems like sometimes we only make one kind of thing, you know. So, uh, honestly, looking at Angel Studios, that's something I think Daily Wire could actually learn from. Is, that's something they could really rethink when it comes to the idea of BintKey. BintKey was supposed to be their app for children, and I understand we need to protect children. I'm all for that. I totally agree with that. But I do think there might be something to be said about separating your art from your artists, and specifically separating your art from your political organization and your political company. I think BintKey would be a great way to have that. And you could still have, same as Netflix, same as HBO Max, you could still have your politics in there, but, you can have it categorized, you can have your documentaries, you can have all those other things that I think, would be encouraging. And it would help eliminate that idea of, oh, I'm clicking politics, instead of, oh, I'm clicking something to help me escape reality, right? I really do hope they reconsider what they use BankKey for. I really, really, really hope they do. I think it's extremely important that Daily Wire follows Angel Studios' way of having things, and just, make us another thing within BintKey, where if we just want to see kid content, we can have that set for our kids, right? But allow us to have more on BintKey. I think that's extremely important. Because honestly, too, separate from this, if I pay money for a political company, you know, not dishing on Ben Shapiro and Matt Walsh and all them. I do enjoy them sometimes, but there's other political people that I would probably give my money to first for politics. Okay. But if I know I can go and watch shows and do this and do that with BintKey, I would do it in a heartbeat. And I will be doing it when Pendragon Cycle returns and comes out. So, then you have, when it comes to conservative art and things that we may be seeing, you have these companies, maybe like a Paramount, when it comes to things like Yellowstone and stuff, where it's like dipping in the water of conservatism, right? They'll say things that, we acknowledge is true, and they'll call out, the left sometimes with certain things within those shows. But the reality is, it's not made by like a strong conservative person. This person's probably more of like a true classical liberal, right? But they just don't hate us, right? They don't hate our guts like a lot of other people do. And so it makes us feel comfortable in watching it. Now, not everybody, there's more people that will be more legalistic, or they'll have certain standards of certain things, and they don't want to watch things with a lot of nudity and stuff like you will find in like Yellowstone and some of those other shows. But a lot of us will cling to it because it's like, wow, it's a great show, has some great storytelling, and the people that are making it, again, do not hate our guts. So it can become a breath of fresh air. And same thing for like something like a Mark Millar, he doesn't make anything. He makes everything for everyone, right? He's a liberal guy. He makes everything for everyone. I mean, you can definitely tell he has some classical liberal views. And because of those classical liberal views, not only does sometimes the things he makes coincide with some of the things that we believe, sometimes it's open to us, right? It's not so postmodernistic. It's a little bit more open to what we believe and how we stand on things, and so we enjoyed those things, right? And so there's those things as well. And I do realize that we need to make a change. And one of the biggest things is that conservatives need to have more self-expression. And the left have a really negative way of pointing this out. But for me, I think if you just look at Jonathan Haidt's moral foundations theory, there's other people involved with that as well, but just Jonathan Haidt's the main guy. If you look at that, it kind of breaks down how we weigh our decision making, our moral decision making. And conservatives, they tend to have higher on about three of the different things. There's authority, loyalty, purity, liberty, and care and fairness. But the reality is that conservatives tend to be balanced on all those things, whereas people on the left, they really have a strong sense of care and fairness, which not only a strong sense of it, but they weigh it a little heavier. It's a deeper feeling for them, care and fairness is, whereas they may not even acknowledge as much the other ones, right? And I can see how if you care about two feelings very deeply, how that can spark creativity, which is probably why we do see more creative people on the left. That's just my personal opinion. But the reality is that I think conservatives have a special gift that we just don't apply when it comes to self-expression. We either do become too preachy because we overthink certain things and we focus on the message first instead of the story. We don't weigh it all out. And I think we would have a better, especially dealing with plot and issues with plot. I think conservatives writers, for example, would have a much better time dealing with plot and making things make sense, to be honest with you, if they were willing to pursue it. And I think for those that can feel deeply about the things that we hold on to, we may look at things in a very equal way. But if those people that can weigh those things, not just equally, but very deeply, I think those kind of people are the ones that can make a really fantastic story that everybody could really not just dig and be a part of, but could really, really enjoy. That's just my personal feeling on that. And so, when it comes to telling stories, I can see how, well, I already mentioned that about feeling deeply. I think it could spark some creativity. Um, you know, and so here's like the goal that I have, right? We know this can be done. We've seen Clint Eastwood do some awesome work. We've seen some others do some awesome work. Like I said, there's a lot of anime that I think if we really broke it down, and a lot of those people will not express their political beliefs, but if it's a My Hero Academia, if it is, a Naruto, if it is, an Attack on Titan, I think, this may make some people mad, but I think a lot of those have some conservative viewpoints. And yeah, I think that's something that is something that we miss out on because we basically exclude it from us. We don't welcome it in. We don't even welcome, like when Captain America came out. We weren't welcoming Captain America. We only complained about things once things came out that we didn't like, but we weren't, claiming Captain America to have conservative values and conservative, points of view when it kind of did. It kind of did, and we let that go. We didn't own that. And so another thing I think too that conservatives need to start thinking about, and before we get into some other solutions, is I think conservatives really do need to come to the terms that maybe making art for just the sake of making art is the right path to go. I know that capitalism is a big deal for us. Okay, I get it. Trust me. I have some ideas for creativity that I want to pursue that I do hope could financially help me out, right? I think everybody wants that. But I do think there is some truth that, if we made art just for making art, I think there'd be some of us that would really surprise people. And maybe the fruits of our labor wouldn't be seen at first, but over time would be a really great thing. Because think of those people that maybe they're not pursuing this as a forever path, right? They're not trying to become, the next Stephen King. They're not trying to become the next Spielberg, but they just want to do something really great for a moment. And they have something they feel really deeply about, at least one story. If it's just one, they feel really deeply about that one story. And so you may have a stay-at-home mother, or you may have a blue-collar worker, and really anybody else with a divergent life path. Maybe a person that's been a part of war for a long time, someone like a Jack Carr, like an ex-Navy SEAL, for example, who sits down on their off time and they pursue artistic ventures. They pursue something different than they've ever done before, and they make something really great. And, we no longer have a Hollywood, you know, with guys who, used to make great movies, but then also served in World War II, right? A lot of people in Hollywood, I'm not saying everyone, but a lot of these people in Hollywood have not experienced a lot of things in life. They haven't served other people in a lot of great ways. They've kind of maybe only served themselves. They've only pursued things for themselves. And when you have people like that, and they're the ones telling stories, what kind of life experience do they have? What kind of perspectives do they have? We can see that, sometimes our villains are becoming more and more just not even nuanced, just kind of the same and boring, right? And I think conservatives would be a good answer to that, having some uniqueness within the characters. And we do need an alternative to the current media slop that's been made by people who haven't really, like I said, haven't experienced hardship, and also have ulterior motives. And this gets into what I had set forth on a smaller video, that maybe you're watching this video because of that smaller video, is that we also need to do something else, which is we need to be less reactionary, more revolutionary in our way of thinking and our way of pursuing art. And we do need revolutionaries, and not in a, like I said, in my shorter video, not in a postmodernist, communist, violent way, right? But more in a founding fathers way. People who are willing to fight for traditional liberalism, right? Traditional liberalism, technically is supposed to coincide what a classical liberal was and a conservative was coming together. And by using a pen and imagination, we need that. And we do need community that encourages creativity. We need to be able to encourage each other. We critique a lot. We need more encouragement. We do. We do need more encouragement for creative ventures. And we need an event that celebrates art and demands improvement for those that want to sell it to us. We need an investment. We need someone who can, the reality is that what I'm about to propose may not be, a lot of conservatives may not view it as the best place to put their money. I mean, that's just reality. There's a lot of conservatives that think that there wouldn't be value in this. I think they're wrong. And we need someone who can make an investment knowing that they may lose a little bit on it. And we need a convention. We need an opportunity for people to come together and to, express ideas, express art, show the things they've done, be able to sell their art, to help encourage young kids to have imagination with certain things, and having moments to rally with everyone to show the work that's been done. Weeks ago, there was a tweet, and, it directed Turning Point USA, Benny Johnson, Nerdrotic, Zachary Levi, Chris Gore, and a bunch of other people. There was two girls that are cosplayers, Star Wars girl and someone else I don't remember the name of. And it was this idea of doing just that. And it got tweeted around and people kind of liked it, but I'm here to say, yes, let's do that. And I would like to expand on this idea, and it's something that is not inherently political. I don't think it should be inherently political, though I do think Turning Point USA should run it. And Turning Point Action should be present with a booth. But besides that, using that booth to encourage people to vote, I think is fine. But that should be it. That should be it. There should be no real politics. There's inherent politics talking about media, and there's probably would be panels that would be talking about left-wing media and conservatism and wokeism or whatever. And those things would happen at this con, I'm sure. And those conversations would happen, and free speech and everything else. But The goal should not be politics. The goal should be the pursuit of art and the pursuit of creativity within the conservative movement on the conservative side. And, it needs to be hosted not by your people that are always doing politics and always doing, journalism and stuff. We like those people. I'm not saying those people shouldn't be there necessarily, but this needs to be hosted by people who are well known in the YouTube space, in the nerd YouTube space. Okay. We can make an exception for Benny Johnson. Okay. I think Benny Johnson is a good exception. I mean, he can run a show, he could be like the main MC, okay, for the whole show. But, we need to have those other people, having panels and workshops, right? Some of these creative people doing those things. Special guests and signings. You have all these YouTubers come in that are on the YouTube space that are, these nerdy people. They're going to show up. If you've looked at their Comic Cons, ton of people are there. Ton of people are there. Whereas the other panels, even people that are well known, like Kevin Smith, will have less people sometimes than some of these conservative people. And we need to have opportunities for people to be able to buy things. It's a market, right? Conservatives have money and to show that they have money and that they're ready to pursue ideas and different things. And, you may be encouraging people that have never checked out certain things before to open up to a whole new world, right? And having them, come in and, be able to sell different products, have different vendors selling different things, I think would be really cool. And then you have your artist alley, having indie creators with their books and their comics and all their different creations, and being able to go over there and look at it and support those things, I think would be a really special experience. And, um, what's cool about it is, you can set up an opportunity for these studios, right? We have Daily Wire now, we have Angel Studios, we have Rippaverse, we have Wildwood Studios, we have PureFlix, something I didn't think about in my shorter video. You can have those people come out and show you what they have. And you can leave the door open for something like a Paramount. You can leave the door open for something like the creator, for example, of Yellowstone and all the things they do at Paramount. A lot of that is targeted to the right wing side. I think, there should be a door open for those people to come to and to show the right wing audience, okay, your classical liberal, conservative, libertarian-esque group of people, maybe even your anarcho-capitalist type people, what they have in store for them and the content that they have in store for them for their audience. I think that door should be open for all those left-wing studios to have that chance to, show off what they have as well. Let the market decide. And let them see how important that our market actually is. I think would be a really great idea. You know, and not only will I believe that it does two things to me, so not only do I believe that it would promote and support creativity within the conservative base, which we much need. We need more conservative people willing to pursue art and make art. It would also show entertainment companies how important the conservative marketplace is, because I think we are a huge marketplace. When we canceled Netflix, people noticed. When we've canceled other things, when Bud Light got canceled, right? People noticed. And to say they wouldn't notice with this, I just think is misguided. And I do think both objectives, bringing us back to a conservative, right? There'd be a goal here. Bringing us back to a conservative, classical, liberal culture, and then also no longer being such negative reactionaries. I'm tired, honestly. When it comes to conservative content and critics and stuff, when it comes to nerd culture, I mean, there's times where I'm watching something and I'll go and watch something because, yeah, I want them to tear into the thing that it's disappointed me and it's really annoyed me. But we got to get away from constantly being negative reactionaries, and we got to start becoming a peaceful positive, revolutionary when it comes to the arts and the culture. We have to start coming up with some real solutions. And I have some more ideas when it comes to this con. I think you could do a lot of fun, right? You got video games, movies, shows, comics, right? Uh let's pursue those things, you know? Let's have some game competitions. Let's have there was that conservative person that plays Magic the Gathering that got kicked out of that tournament. Let's have a Magic of the Gathering tournament that happens. Let's have a Madden tournament. Let's have a film festival. Let's have a film festival that's vetted before the films are shown. The best films, like pick 10 of them, okay? Short films, pick like the best 10 short films that were made by different people. Let Chris Gore and the people at Film Threat watch them. Any other judges Chris Gore wants, let them watch them. And then let's do an event one night where we watch all the short films and then there's an award present afterwards, right? This would be a really great idea for your political people that are journalists that are really well known. I mean, they're almost celebrity-esque, right? Some of them have been involved with nerd stuff in the past. Let Tim Pool and Quartering be a part of a Magic of the Gathering tournament game, right? Let them be a part of that. Guys, we have a NASCAR driver, a race car driver that's a part of the conservative nerd community, okay? Get this guy involved somehow, doing a racing competition, you have George Alexopoulos, who's an artist. Let him do a artist workshop where he talks about art and the importance of art and drawing and painting and all those different things. You have Chuck Dixon, who is a great comic writer. I mean, literally, Nightwing, guys, like Nightwing, Batman, Nightfall, like, dude, like, has done some great stuff. He wrote for Rippaverse as well. Let him do a workshop. So not only are you getting taught by knowledgeable people, but really talented people. Like have a Chuck Dixon, Andrew Clavin, and maybe someone else having a writing workshop on how to be a great writer. Having the way that Turning Point has debates and talks. Let's double down on that. Let's invite J.K. Rowling on to talk about stories and have a discussion with someone else. I know she's not considered right wing, but like we're accepting of different people with different ideas, and something like that could be really interesting, and could produce something really special. And honestly, if you do it once a year, you could kind of pick where you want it, right? And you could do it in Florida. You could do it where you get the most people from Turning Point to show up, right? When you get these huge crowds from Turning Point, do it somewhere like that. Have Turning Point promote it. Have Turning Point run it. I think it's just as important. It is just as important as having those events you've been having where you have those speakers come up and have a little bit of a lecture and then have people come and ask questions. I really do. I think it's just as important. I don't think it needs to be done as much. I don't think you need to have 1,000 of these, but I think a once in a year event would be a great way to pursue this. And I do think it would produce, over time, it would produce something really special. And so I hope those that have watched this long really do, consider what I'm saying. Because like I said, I think it's important. But I think that's going to be it for me. I hope you enjoyed this. Any of these people, Daily Wire, Rippaverse, Turning Point USA, whatever. If Nerderotic, if you guys are serious about this, I know I'm not needed. Okay, I know I'm not. But if you guys are genuinely serious about this, I would love to help. Okay, I have been a part of a lot of these conventions in the past. I have moderated mini panels. Okay, I have moderated, for example, Dean Cain. For example, I've had a great conversation with him in front of an audience, and so I have helped out with these events in different ways. I know how a lot of these events go. Not everything, but I know a lot, and I know the people that know how to do these things. And so if y'all need any help, I would literally make a life change to make something like this happen, because I think it's that important. Okay. I think it's that important. So, anyway, I'm always available. I don't always use social media, but I'm always available, when I can see it, and I'll always reach back out. And so, anyway, guys, I hope you are all doing well. I hope y'all are having a great, week, and, whatever you're doing, wherever you're going, I hope you're having a good one. Peace.